Do you think it's too late to introduce like a concept or a format or a hook to TOFOP?
No,
Have we talked about this
yeah. I
before?
mean, I think that we've talked about it several times over the last 12 years. Should this podcast have a point?
Well, I'm just thinking, like, it's so easy to go into an
Yeah.
episode of Two Guys, One Cup because
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, there's games to talk about and people, and it's like when things slow down, we just bring up, did you see this? Whereas, I mean, this is a lot of work, really. To just come up with something. Is it? Well, kind of.
Well, we just spent 25 minutes talking about the same topic we've talked about for the last 5 weeks straight. We've done five episodes on the boy band 5.
I know, but that's, I guess you're used to working, like you do improvised shows. You do shows where you just go, okay, I'm just going to get up there and see what happens. But I think from my perspective, I'm like, oh, at least with Two Guys, One Cup, I feel like there's a safety net. Whereas with this, it's like, are we really going to talk about 5 for the 5th? I mean, it would be amazing if this was actually the 5th episode we've talked about.
I mean, it definitely would be at least the 5th you have, because I'm going to count other episodes of FOFOP where you've talked about.
There's at least 2 episodes of FOFOP. Cam Knight and Claire Tonti are definitely talked about.
We've talked about it at least 3 times. I would say maybe 4.
Okay, well, all right, let's say it is 5. What a perfect note to go out on. There'll be a ban on 5 from now on? Should we just, like the Bin trilogy found its natural end, and then, months later, maybe even years later, we occasionally reference, or people still send me Bin stuff as if it's like a key part of my personality. I have not had Bin issues in over 4 years, but I'm the Bin guy to a lot of people.
Yeah, but not anymore, Charlie. You are now absolutely the 5 guy.
Oh, no. Oh, no. I've swapped one trope for an even worse one.
So, here's what I think that this show is have you watched, I talked about this with Justin on FOFOP, so I'll try not to go into the same areas. You might not have seen the show, but there is a show on Amazon Prime called Outer Range. Have you seen this?
I'm not even aware of it. No.
Okay. Well, at some stage when you've had a little bit of medicine, like sit down and watch yourself a couple of episodes of Outer Range, because it's this Josh Brolin show that what Justin explained to me is that Amazon have a bit of an algorithm that goes through like what parts of things people enjoy and whatever. And this show feels like it's the way I described it on FOFOP was like, it very much is the avalanches of a TV show where from minute to minute, it's just being completely different shows and they're all just joined together in this show. It is one of the most bonkers things you will ever watch in your entire life. It's quite compelling. I'm really enjoying it, but it's like, you literally are like, oh, I get this. This is Stranger Things. Oh, hang on, this is Fargo. Oh, hang on, this is Twin Peaks. And you're just like, it's doing all those things quite well. And I think that that's what TOFOP is. I feel like TOFOP is, it's just different things joined together in a long conversation. This is a mixtape. It's not an album that has like,
it's a concept. It's a concept.
Yeah. It's a giant sprawling concept piece. That's basically what it is. And there's just times when, like, the musician is obsessed with one particular note transgression or exploring one sort of area. It's fucking jazz, man.
It's jazz, man.
Fucking jazz.
But do you think this show would be damaged? Like, if we all of a sudden had segments, like regular segments, do you think the show would be damaged by that?
Yeah, because we'd stop doing it because it'd be too much work.
I just listen to like other shows though, like Weekly Planet is a perfect example. Like, because they have tropes and things that they lean back on and running jokes and stuff like that. But you know where you sit with those guys. You listen to like the first 10 minutes is going to be news, and then they get to the film or the series or the topic of that week's episode. James will chip up.
But why do you need that? Like, why? I mean, it's
great
just
that because
I
feel like.
But like, why do we need structure? Why can't we be the ones that have no structure? I bet they're envious every week when they're putting together clips and running orders and like having to be across everything. Well, like, I mean, our attitude is that we can do an entire football adjacent podcast where some weekends neither of us will watch a game of football. I think this is a very good model that we have latched onto.
the no work model.
Suddenly we should like be going that, we need to be across everything.
I'll frame it in another way. So when you're bringing on someone to FOFOP for the first time, And like when I try and bring on new people as much as I can, and the question that they always ask is, what would you like me to prepare? What would you like to talk about? And I'm always like, oh, well, there is nothing to prepare. We'll just talk about whatever comes up. So if you want to talk about something, yeah, bring it in, but don't feel the need. We'll find what the conversation's about as we're doing it. Do you do the same thing? Do you prep people for a FOFOP?
I don't prep people for anything.
There's no courtesy finger with Will Anderson.
No, I just assume that I'm not just going to jam it in. You don't need a courtesy finger. We're going to do it together. I always think when you're making a podcast, like the way that I always think of it is we're about to make something together. So we get together and we make this conversation, this riff, this world together. And so I did the dollop at the Enmore last night with Hamo as well. So the four of us on stage, finally four, white middle-aged men get a say. And I think it's well beyond its time. But it was such a fun show. And the thing about it is it will never be done again. Like that episode never happens again. It's all improvised in the moment. And the great joy of it isn't like even the audience response in a way, even though the audience response was amazing. The great joy of it is making something with your friends. Like at the end of it, you walk away and you go, there's the thing that we just made that some people will listen to that episode in 5 years or 10 years, or maybe even longer than that. And you just got together with your mates and you made something. And that's what I've always liked about this show is that it doesn't feel like you have to come in with an agenda. I don't feel like I have homework. I can just, if sad things are happening, we can be sad. And if happy things are happening, we can talk about big issues or small issues. I think that is what the show is. Like, we don't need to have what everybody else has.
I think you're right. And to go back to Smodcast, I think that's why I don't listen anymore, is because there isn't that free-flowing, it's Scott and Kevin catching up, because that was the appeal of it. And, Scott has occasionally popped in to do an episode, and when I listen to it, I always really love it. I'm always like, oh, that's right. And these two are such great chemistry, and they're such a great double act, and they really spark off each other really well. But what Kevin does in all his other podcasts is very structured. There's a hook, there's a point to it. Even with Smodcast now, he'll bring someone on to let's re-examine this, or let's talk about your time on this or whatever. So it's more of a formulaic interview show. It's still very much a Kevin Smith show, but it's not what Smodcast was, which was like, we're just going to catch up for an hour, and where does the conversation take us? We'll see.
So Jimmy Pardo does a podcast called Never Not Funny. It's one of the original podcasts.
Another one.
And
yep.
During the lockdown, I reckon I've listened to 200 episodes of it. Like, I'd just gone through a period of my time where I'd sort of forgotten about it a bit, or just forgotten how much I liked it or whatever, as you do, you just
dip in and out.
I dipped it back in, and it was the perfect pandemic listening, because you got to chart a course. I listened to 2 years of it, like over the period of like a few weeks. And it's like, I got to hear them like at the start of the pandemic, kind of rationalizing, dealing with it through the history of the show, the story of what the pandemic was through their eyes. And it was really fantastic, because they talk a little bit about that, but then they just play trivia games and, just talk to each other about what they did on the weekend. And it was all that I wanted. I just wanted to know, like, what movie did they see, or did they watch a documentary and they wanted to talk about that? That's actually all I wanted from it. In fact, too many bells and whistles would have got in the way of what I was finding entertaining about it.
Yeah, you're right. Why am I questioning this, Will?
I don't know.
We've got the perfect formula.
Well, I mean, this is the only one that suits the time that I have. So I'm working pretty hard to rationalize it and justify it.
I guess it's sort of just an insecurity about like what this is, and will it, like, I mean, I enjoy doing it still, which is amazing after 12 years. That like, this will be fun. I look forward to it. And sometimes I'll come away from like an episode that we've done and I'll be like, there's a really good idea in that. Like, the 5 movie, like if you did some kind of like, wacky, because I remember Jem actually said to me a couple of weeks ago when I was ranting at her about 5 and what happened to Jay and stuff. She was like, this, could be an interesting subject for like a limited series. If you did like, there was a boy band that was hugely popular and then they all went their separate ways and now they're in their 40s and they're trying to kind of like reclaim that. And I was like, yeah. And then the Jay character, like he's gone missing.
Finding Jay.
You got to find Jay. But I think it's like, there aren't many, like, unless you're, you work, you're a comedian, I guess, or a writer, and you work in that field, there's not a lot of opportunities in conversations in your day-to-day life. Like, your partner doesn't want to sit down and do hypotheticals with you. Like, there's not a lot of opportunity for you to just like take an idea and then it's essentially workshopping it, isn't it? Like, we just bring something up and then we workshop the idea. Like you say, sometimes it's serious, sometimes it's absurd, and sometimes we do a hypothetical. It's like, okay, well, what happened if all these elements? But this is probably the only forum, non-professional. Well, is it? It's non-professional.
It's definitely non-professional.
What I mean to say is, like, I get paid to do this with other people from time to time, and that's different to this, because this is more. There is no point to what we're doing. Like, when I'm doing this with other people, it's because we have a deadline or we have to deliver something down the line. Whereas you and I just like, let's just freestyle for no reason.
Yeah. I like to think that what basically TOFOP is, okay, if you want to put it in another way then, is I do believe that over the entire course of TOFOP, there are genuinely probably some brilliant ideas. If somebody had taken the idea for that show or that movie or that idea or whatever and had the capacity and organizational skills to run with it, develop it, do all those sort of things, I bet there's a whole bunch of those in there. Basically what we are is like the footage of the Beatles in the studio. And a lot of the time we're just like jamming some old, cover song that we just like to go to. And occasionally, you just get to something that is really good, but a lot of it's just like wasted time in between the good stuff, right? I mean, I think the Beatles had a higher strike rate than we do.
Yeah.
But but I think if somebody went through the entire back catalogue of TOFOP and just went, I'm going to come up with the best ideas they've had over the last 12 years, and then you package them into, say, a 1 hour podcast. I reckon over like 12 years of doing this podcast, we probably had 1 hour of really good ideas. And if you package them into a podcast, it would sound like we knew what we were talking about.
If you selectively edited out of 12, well, that is the amazing thing about Get Back, isn't it? Is like, they were 26 or something at the end of their peak creativity. Yes. Like, they're going to go on to do other great things, but just as that landscape changing, creative force. But there is so much time spent fucking around, like so much of their time in the studio. What I learned from that is like, yeah, sure, they're geniuses, but to get to the genius, they just had to front up like blue collar workers. It's like sometimes John would be late because, he did too much heroin the night before or whatever. But ultimately, they all had enough work ethic where they would just turn up and they would just sit there and they wouldn't chuck the shits. They would just, well, George did for a couple of days, but they had enough work ethic. They just stayed there and they would play other people's songs. They would sing jokey songs. They would do cover versions of their old stuff, with a new spin on it, until finally they just clicked. And it is such a lesson in that, yeah, man, like they're the Beatles, of course, and their top end is much higher than most people's. But what is underneath that top end and is just work ethic. And I think it all stems back from their Hamburg days where because did you notice that and Get Back? They keep referencing, it was like in Hamburg. They're so wistful and nostalgic about that 4-month period they spent in Hamburg playing 12 hours a day. But for them, that was like the best time in the world. Like they just played rock and roll and took a lot of speed and had no responsibilities. But I think what ground in them in that period was like, oh, this is how you make music, is you just fucking put in a 12-hour day until you come up with something.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that podcast episodes of TOFOP just needed to be 12 hours. If we were just willing to do 12 hours a week in a go, I reckon there'd be an hour of good stuff in there.
To see the full video, join our Patreon.
Patreon.com/TOFOP.